I'm Stan Christensen, and this is All Things Negotiation. I've spent my career working as a professional negotiator and have taught a class on negotiation at Stanford University for over 20 years. On this podcast, I interview the experts, people who have negotiated in all walks of life. Together, we'll learn from their stories, their successes, their failures, and what they've learned along the way. Many of you will recognize Steve Young as one of the greatest football players of all time. In his 15 years with the San Francisco 49ers, he won the Super Bowl, he was the two-time MVP, and ended up in the Hall of Fame for all of his records and accomplishments. What some of you don't know is he had a truly great second act when he started and co-founded HGGC, a private equity firm in Silicon Valley. In our broad-ranging conversation today, we talk about how negotiation played a key role in the success of his NFL career. We talk about how he negotiated with players, with coaches, with agents, and even competitors. I even get Steve to talk a little bit about how he negotiated his own celebrity, including remaining flat-footed when he met celebrities like Bon Jovi and Charlton Heston. Welcome to the podcast, Steve Young.
Stan, good to see you, buddy. Good to see you.
So a lot of people listening might be thinking football, negotiation, how does it apply? Does negotiation play a role in football in your experience, in your career?
Stan, I mean, the truth about negotiations is it is life. If there's another human around, you're in negotiations. And so football, by definition, with a lined field, a scoreboard, a live score, 80,000 witnesses, I mean, the negotiation that's going on is rich. And the idea that, the only negotiation that really matters is when, we're at some kind of a state negotiation between two countries. Like I negotiated when I got out of bed with my wife today on what we were going to do today. It's ongoing and forever. So the concepts that you're trying to draw out for people are absolutely going to be useful in. It doesn't matter where the negotiations. I think they're actually useful in anywhere you go.
Well, one of the categories that we've talked about over the years is negotiating with agents. You know, as a sports guy, you have an agent. There are a bunch of negotiations there. Any stories from your past on sports agents?
Well, Lee Steinberg was a guy who was young. You know, I was 22 and he was like 28, and he had taken over the world as far as sports lawyers. He was a lawyer and an agent. So, and it's interesting when you have representation that you got to remember that the person that's representing you is saying, and I think intending to represent, the client. Like it's 100% intent. But the problem is that it's a human saying it, and the human's never going to be 100% focused on just you. There's the other part of it. That is their career. It is their ongoing business. And so, like I said, in football in general, you have, and this is really an example for everybody. You're part of a team, but you're also an independent contractor. And so, in that independent contracting, that's a super I care about myself. I care about my career. I care about my contract. I care about getting ahead. And then there's this team. I got to worry about the team. And the great negotiators create an environment where they can show and see all those different aspects of needs that people have, or insecurities or desires or whatever else that is playing a part in it. And so at least Steinberg and me, when I figured out that he wanted his career to be one where he was really out in the front, really out, someone that would be well known for all the cool things that he was doing, including getting all of his clients to start foundations young in their careers to benefit where they grew up and where they went to college and where they're playing as pros. There's a spirit about how he negotiated, which was more of an abundant spirit, a partnership, and trying to figure out ways to, and then also wanted to make sure that he got the biggest amounts of money in the negotiation. So it's all these aspects. And I think why you asked me the question is, our relationship got much richer when I realized that he wasn't just representing me. He was also representing himself as an independent contractor, right? I have a client I want to take care of, but there was needs that he had and things that he was looking for that weren't what I was looking for.
Yeah. And how did you help him meet his needs? Can you think of any examples of that?
Any kind of time we were, in a public, in together with public, I, I would make sure that he was out in front. That's what he wanted to do. That's what he wanted to be. And so it's like our relationship got a lot richer when he was getting what he wanted, and it didn't matter to me. Like, it's one of those things where in negotiations, the one things you got to really get to is the things that are most important to you that don't matter to me. Get them out in the open.
Yeah.
Make sure you get those done because those are high value situations that are going to change the relationship and change the negotiation.
So two really useful things you bring up that I want to highlight. One is the principal agent problem. So you've got a principal and an agent, and the agent's interests might not dovetail exactly. The second point you bring up, which is, no, it never can.
Never will. I think that's why you have to say that. It never will dovetail exactly. So find out the aspects of the relationship that don't dovetail and start to dig into them.
Second thing I want to bring up, because it's so useful, is you in this case had complementary interests. Things he cared about and you cared about were different. You could help him become famous, put him out in front, ask him to be in the photo. Then you're going to get better representation for you, and it's a win-win.
It seems dumb to what I said, but it was a small example of what we're trying to show here. And it's really in negotiations, if you're going to negotiate without seeing the person on the other side, with quotations, right? Seeing them in their is as totally as you can with the limitations of humanity, and as their insecurities, as their incentives, as their great qualities, as their needs, as their wants, as their have-to-haves, which are other things that they don't have to have. Like, if you don't do that work and you just come to a negotiation with a big stick and just wanted to pound people, yeah, if your stick is big enough, you'll probably get most of what you want, but it will not be abundant. It will not be something, that negotiation will not end ever, because all you've done is you've beaten someone to submission, and then somehow in the future it's coming back because you have not truly negotiated a settlement. You have not truly negotiated an agreement. All you've done is ended the open period of what we'll call negotiation, and now it's closed for what a particular reason that someone had the power to do, and they'll just wait for the next time. And you've not really solved anything.
Well, as you said the words pound into submission, I thought of a personal example where you pounded me into submission. You probably don't remember this story, but in the early 2000s, you're playing football, and there was this TV show that people under 30 probably never heard of called Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? And you called me and you said, and correct me if I'm remembering this wrong, you said, Stan, they want me to be on Celebrity Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and I need this thing called a lifeline. Do you remember this story?
Of course.
And do you remember what you tried to get me to do?
I needed smart people, and I thought you were super smart. So have you as a lifeline. The sad thing is that the question they asked me about Crucible, I thought was high heat. It was high temperature. I mean, it was a high pressure. And I got that. No, I didn't even get to you. But you agreed. You agreed to do it. And I just, my greatest regret in life is that I didn't call you as a lifeline. My hubris, thinking I knew the answer to the simple question, didn't even get to get you to the spot where you could save me.
And, that's so funny.
I apologize for that.
No, that's so funny. I was thinking about, it's 20 years ago. I was having a little bit of a different memory when you called me and you said, do you want to be on the show? You said, look, all my friends are football players. They're not super smart. You're a smart guy. You said, and I said, no, I don't want to be on national TV. What if I get it wrong? And I was resisting. And you said, Stan, I will tell people on national television that you're the smartest person I know. Will you do it for me as a favor? And I said, okay, I'll do it.
So Stan looking for the light, like Lee Steinberg, I use the same technique. I know exactly. Stan wants to be known as the smartest man alive, and so I'll take advantage of that.
So I was ready to be the smartest man alive, and the producer of the show called me and said, Regis is going to call you in the next 15 minutes. Be ready on your cell phone. So the phone rang, and I was expecting to talk to Regis and be on national television. And it was not Regis, but it was a producer. He said, Steve went out on the first question. Sorry, we don't need you.
Yeah, that was terrible.
Well, let's get back.
Great regret. My wife, I was just ashamed. It was terrible. Terrible memory. Terrible.
Let's get back to things that'll be more interesting for the listeners. So teammates. You and I have talked, you've come to my Stanford class and talked about this, about accountability. And how do you create accountability with a team? Do you have any stories from the 49er days where you had to teach that principle, own accountability?
Yeah, I mean, there's the big one where I learned the worst things that happen in football are interceptions or fumbles. When the ball, the offense has the ball, and then all of a sudden the quarterback does something, he fumbles it, or I throw an interception, and all of a sudden things have gone south fast, like it's disaster. And the lesson is there was this moment in time immediately when you wanted to list all the things that had gone wrong that led to this terrible thing that weren't all about you. Even though I was the one that threw the interception, I tended to want to list the mitigation that led to it. It's like, hey, by the way, you turned the wrong way. And by the way, you didn't block the guy and it hit me, like those are all, I listed truths, absolute truths. They were mitigating truths, but they were truths that I felt like needed to get into the system so that everyone understood what happened. It was so disincentivizing. It was like it was like a blanket over any kind of progress, because I found out that over time, what is most important, and I'll call it the truest truth, because remember, I listed truths, mitigating truths, but what was the truest truth? And that's what I tell you about negotiation. Seek the truest truth. The truest truth of the situation with me and with my mistake was the ball was in my hand and now it's in their hands. That's the truest truth. So own the truest truth. So much of my marriage, so much of my relationship with the kids, so much of my relationship at work are really about finding what is the situation is complex. There's all kinds of negotiations going on, trying to figure out but step back. What's the truest truth in this situation? And have the vulnerability to find out that it might be you, right? And so I found that when I started to say, after terrible mistakes, big interceptions, big moments of failure, that I would say, you know what, forget about all the rest of it. Forget about mitigation. I don't care about it. The truest truth is the ball was in my hands. It's in their hands. I screwed it up. The truest truth needed to be said, because if it's not said, or it's not, kind of brought forward, then mitigation will always take the front row. And when mitigation takes the front row, everything devolves. The second ultimate truth is recognized and accounted for. What happens is now mitigation can now come into the room effectively and can be found and useful and can be dealt with. And so many people miss the first step. They want to run to mitigation. And I will finish the story by talking about how anyone who wants to see this live, like in amazing ways, is watch post-game of any NFL game this fall, where the quarterback appears and now has to face the media after every loss. Don't do wins. It's not as easy to find. But the losses, find the losses, find the losing quarterback, tune in to that post-game press conference, and just put your ear to what I just said and listen for words or phrases or sentences of mitigation or accountability. And the guys that are using the mitigation are probably younger, probably not going to win next week. And the guys that have been around a long time, the guys that understand that this is fundamental to attracting their teammates for the next week, is this moment right here. Nothing else matters than this moment on the air, in the press conference, speaking about accountability. And the masters of it, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, Drew Brees, Patrick Mahomes, all the great quarterbacks master this truth because they recognize it over the years, like I did. It's fundamental. How you bring accountability into a system is vital. And that's the best way I can have to describe it.
Love it. So if I'm going to summarize that, I'd say, number one, don't blame other people. It just doesn't work. Number two.
Well, no, there's a time and a place. Mitigation is. I came home from the store the other day. My wife gave me a list, and I came home, and what happened about the 40th time in a row, she goes, "Well, where's the first thing on the list?" And I remember she wrote down the rest of them. I went to the store for the thing she told me, but she freaking mumbled it, right? And it didn't go into my head because she mumbled it. And so if I would have come home, she goes, why didn't you get the first thing? What I want to say is, you mumbled it, right? But the truth of the matter is, like, own it right there. Like, I went to the store to get the thing she asked for. And even though that's a mitigating factor that she mumbled it, just say, I screwed it up.
Yep.
And let me go back and fix it. And the relationship blossoms, because then later I can say, hey, by the way, the first thing you said, you kind of mumbled. I didn't really hear it. And now all of a sudden she's like, oh yeah, I might have done that. Otherwise, if you don't do that, everything devolves. People get divorced over stupid stuff like that.
Yep. Totally agree. Did you ever go to the sidelines in a football game and take ownership for the interception and say, hey, we're going to get back on the field. Let's, when the defense gets us the ball, we'll get back. I'll get you guys a touchdown. And then you just turn around and threw another interception.
Yes,
that ever happened?
I had it happen. And I remember laughing to myself. It's like, well, so now what do I do? Right. And I remember I stuck with my guns. I said, look, I screwed up again. I know that's hard to believe, but it can't happen 3 times in a row. And so let's own it. Let's go to the sideline and get a drink of water. Let's come back out and let's attack it again. And, I always make the joke that I'm in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. I never did it 3 times in a row. So I guess the point is proven. You can do a couple of screw ups in a row and own them. The third one is probably not going to be, people are going to say, you can own it all you want. You can't, no one can 3 screw ups. But I think human beings give people 2 big screw ups in a row as long as they're accountable.
Give us a couple stories about either players on your team, on the 49ers, who you had to figure out your relationship and how you worked out those differences, and or just difficult people that you encountered and how you dealt with difficult situations in terms of players.
Yeah, so this one, Charles Haley was a Hall of Fame football player. And on our team, and he said this, this is all public information. He's brought this forward that he suffered from bipolar. He was bipolar. And he was smart as a whip, and he used it he was a predator, like a human predator with, like, if you walked by him and you had a limp or you had messy hair or you had something physical or something that happened in the game where you screwed up, or like he would just in front of everybody would say something that was so biting and terrible and demeaning and most of the time it was funny too, because it was so biting but it was like, and everyone would laugh and it felt like at the time that he was with us early in my career, he was the worst on me. Maybe everyone felt that way, but I certainly felt like he would just crushed me. And so I got to a point where when I came to work, I would see if his car was there. And if it wasn't, I didn't worry about it. But if it was there, I would call the equipment manager and say, where is he? Like, is he in the training room? Is he in the weight room? Is he doing the pool work? Is he in the locker room? Like, where is he? And then I'd find out where he was. And then I would just stay away. Like, I just avoided him like the plague. And like, I remember if he was in the training room getting ice or getting kind of treatment for an injury, and I had an injury, I'd have someone to get the ice. I'd go do it. I'd put ice on my shoulder in the equipment room. I just wouldn't even go in there. So this lasted for quite a while. And then one game, we went up to Seattle to play the Seahawks, and landed at SeaTac. And when you land, we had a charter, and then you get off, and right off you take the stairs down, and then you get on a series of buses, and the buses go over the hotel, and then you spend the night, and then you play the next day. And so I get stuck with a coach. I come down the stairs, I jump on the last bus, and I'm looking, and it's packed. And of course, there's one seat left, and it's next to Charles. And I sit down, and I'm like, oh, how did this happen? How did I get here? How did I? And the bus starts to drive, and he turns to me and says, "Are you married?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not." He goes, "Huh? I thought all Mormons were married. You don't have like 10 kids?" And I'm like, "No, I'm not married." And he goes, "Huh? I didn't know that about you." And his wife was going through a medical issue that we'd all heard about and kind of been hopeful and wanting to see get better. And so I took the opportunity. I said, "Well, and how's your wife? Is she doing okay?" And he goes, "Hey, thanks for asking. Yeah, she's doing better." And so for the next 15 minutes, I had one of the richer conversations I've had with someone on a bus, and it was with Charles Haley. And the point being that suddenly we could see each other, right? Not as, predator and
victim,
but two people. And look, he was still him, but it was never the same. It was never as personal. It was never as painful. And it was always something that I could handle in the future. And now we're really good friends. And when we see each other, we laugh about it. and he's apologized many times. I remember him the other day, like, what an ass I was. And I go, yeah, but it's amazing to me, the conflicts that are born out of vacuums of communication. And I chose, look what I did. There's a bad situation happening. And what did I choose to do? To make a bigger vacuum, right? Did I try to go solve it? Did I try to find unique, clever ways to address it? No, I just avoided it and made it probably worse, because he probably heard from somebody, hey, Steve's trying to avoid you. And now what's going to happen? Well, now I'm looking for him even more. Yep. So it's in the very reaction of me trying to solve the problem ineffectively, I've made it worse.
Yeah. One of the things I teach the students is you can find things in common with everybody. Your job is to find those points of intersection and build a relationship based on those. So it sounds like that's kind of how you solve that situation.
Well, yeah, human behavior is so social. Like, there's a lot of abusive, there's toxic relationships out there between people, and you've got to make sure that you're safe and that you do not engage in toxic environments. But okay, put that aside for a second. I know that's a big issue, but put it aside for a second. All other relationships should be sought, right? You should be catapulted into people. That should be how we feel. But I'm more naturally reticent to do that.
Yeah.
And so it's a harder thing for me to do. But one of the best things that I can learn to do in negotiation is get in the middle of it. And
yeah,
so many people negotiate, and they negotiate from afar.
Right. And I think one of the misperceptions people have about negotiation, you alluded to this at the beginning, is that it's a formalized process. And the reality is it's all attempts to persuade or influence another party. And that's why it's present in football. Let's talk about your relationship with Jerry Rice. I remember years ago, again, you may not remember these stories, but I remember you were having a hard time connecting with him. I think you told me you were 6 feet and these linemen are coming in and they're 6'6" and they're trying to kill you and you're not really seeing them and able to connect. How did you work that out? I think he gave you some tough feedback maybe one time. So talk about your relationship with Jerry Rice and how you negotiated that into such a good outcome.
Well, Jerry was already world famous when I got there, and he was world famous with Joe Montana. So a quarterback and receiver relationship is elevated in football and the media, and so that was fully formed. And so I was the interloper. And so when I took over, Jerry would say, and he'd be in the media, pass would be dropped. He said, well, I'm not used to a left-handed spin. Steve throws, by intimation, Steve doesn't throw a good as ball as Joe. It's not as catchable, and that this kind of went on for some time. And I was like, dang, man, it feels like we're doing really well. And someone came to me and gave me a comparison of, like, I've been with him 20 games and Joe's first 20 games. And he said, you're doing really well. And I was like, dang, I should probably talk to Jerry, at least tell him that we're doing good. Like, it's not terrible. And I did. And in a funny kind of light way, I just kind of let him know, like, we're doing really good. And it made a difference, because in his mind, it helped him transition to a new part of the relationship that didn't have to be in comparison. Didn't have to be whether it's Joe or me. It was like, okay, we're doing good things with Steve, and I'm just going to lean into I don't have to, I can leave behind some of the baggage. And then later, I noticed that Jerry would be catching the ball a lot more behind practice with our equipment manager. and just catch, like over and over and over again. And I talked to the equipment manager, Ted Walsh, one day. I was like, why is Jerry's like catching 1,000 balls back there? And he goes, well, because I'm lefty and he wants to get more used to your spin. And so I want to, and so it was interesting to me that part of that building that relationship was now Jerry saying, well, Steve's lefty, Ted's lefty. Let me just catch 1,000 balls from Ted in the back of practice. And I thought that was a heck of a thing. And you talk about negotiating with people. Once you can open up and start to have good relations and good communication, and it doesn't mean it all goes perfectly well, but that you have, because good communications are really important when things are not going well. And building that into Jerry and our relationship really built one of my best friendships even today. That at the time, because of it so highly focused on, scrutinized, and so many people's feelings could get hurt because it's in the media, it's very public, things can happen and things can be said that ruin relationships. And I just, he and I didn't allow that.
Yeah.
And now look back and see only fruit. Like if I told Jerry that little note about, early in our, he wouldn't even know what I was talking about. He would not even, he's like, what? That's impossible.
I want to highlight one thing you brought up, which is so good, which is you brought in objective criteria, right? Jerry might have been saying at the time, this is not Joe Montana, we're not doing as well. But when you showed him, hey, our results are really good over these 20 games. And I find in negotiation, rather than fighting about who's right or who's wrong, bringing in third-party data that's objective that someone can take a look at can make a big difference in a negotiation. So I think that's just excellent.
I've seen that actually happen. Lee Steinberg, we talked about him as my agent and lawyer back in the day. His greatest skill was the deck that he would put together, data-driven deck that was very influential, but had to be very careful because if people feel like they're being sold, they won't trust the data.
Right.
The data has to come in a very neutral feeling way and get trusted. If you can bring trusted data, man, it is I just emphasize that point. Trusted data into a negotiation is super powerful.
Yeah, and that's why it has to be based on third-party objective. I'd use that word, objective data. We live in an era where people have a hard time defining truth, but the reality is, if you look at those stats, probably people aren't lying about the stat sheet. And so I think that one's great. Another story I'm thinking of is, you were 6 feet. I think you and I used to measure against each other. We're both probably 5'11" 3/4. At least we used to be.
I'm 6'2". I don't know what you are.
You're not 6'2".
With your hairdo, maybe you're 6'2". I don't know. But
you were never 6'2" other than a football card. But I do remember. I do remember you telling me, "Hey, I'm shorter than most quarterbacks, maybe except Doug Flutie." Sure. And you're having a hard time connecting with the guys in the end zone. And one of the coaches, I can't remember if it was head coach.
It was Mike Holmgren. Look, there were guys that were 6'6", Peyton Manning with that long neck. I mean, it was like, you could see everything, right? And I felt like it was cheating. For me, I was always dodging around people, trying to get glimpses of people. And one time Jerry Rice was wide open and I didn't throw him. And I went to the sideline and Mike Holmgren, my coach, he's like, Jerry Rice was open. Why didn't you throw him the ball? And I said, well, I couldn't see him. And the feedback was, well, you better start seeing him. And I was like, seriously, that's the coaching tip?
One of the best coaches in the NFL, and that's all I can say.
Better start seeing him. And it's funny they said that because the truth is he was right. I better start seeing them, right? Because otherwise I'm going to get fired, right? But gave me no insight into how to start seeing them. Which I started to do. Funny, because I was worried about my visibility, I started to kind of take a gut instinct of where they were and started to throw a little bit more blind. And that was a huge bonus in my career because it actually got me to let the ball go earlier and with more clarity, like not as much clarity, but like because you let it go earlier on instinct, people were open and really made a difference. So he was actually right. You better start seeing him. I didn't start seeing him. I just started educated guessing where they were and letting them have it.
So it worked. Well, let's talk about coaches a little bit. You've played for several. I'm thinking Bill Walsh, has to be top 10 all-time NFL coach. So who are the coaches, either in football or other sports, that you think did a good job of negotiating when we look at persuasion and influence? They've got to try to pull out the best of you. Who were the great negotiators as coaches? What
Yeah,
they do?
two head coaches I had in college was Lavelle Edwards, and then as a pro was Bill Walsh, and both of them, they were different and similar. Greatness in coaching, there's a quality that great coaches have to have, and that is, and I'll call it gift from heaven. It's a gift of discernment. It's a gift of of visibility into other humans and their lives and who they are and what they can be. Great coaches have that ability because they're not guessing; they actually can see it and they can articulate it to you as a vision for who you could be. And I remember Lavelle Edwards very clearly when I was very young telling me the capacity that I had. And I had no idea that he would be right. I had no idea that he could be right. But the fact that he said it and that I trusted him and I knew that he was somebody that was, had been around for a long time, it made a huge impact on me. And in some ways, the same quality that Bill Walsh had, in that he could absolutely see completely the full measure of who you could be. And then, but Bill was also about how to get there. I can give you the steps. I can create the environment. Bill was somebody that looked at, this is late 80s, early 90s of, nutrition, hydration, mental health, sleep. He was an Aura Ring guy before Aura even was born, right? And so he was looking for ways to improve your game. The West Coast offense. How many times he gave me insight into ways that I could do it better. Great coaches are great communicators, and they communicate in a way that is athletic, so that he could yell at me because he didn't always yell at me, and he could joke with me because he didn't always joke with me. He could, he could tell somebody else to tell me something because he didn't always do that. Like, he had all these different ways to communicate, and they're all effective because they're all coming from different places, and I could take them all in. I thought he was a master communicator. He had the fundamental quality and the gift from heaven of discernment. I could see what you could be, and then I have this incredible ability to communicate it to you over and over in different ways to help you get there.
Speaking of yelling, there's a video online. I was looking at some of your clips in preparation for this, and I saw a video, and I think it was when George Seifert was the coach, you screaming at him. Is that ever appropriate for a player to go after a coach? I mean, you see it more and more these days.
Well, that's a unique situation. That had 6 or 7 years of buildup to one moment. The whole Joe Montana, Steve Young awkward dilemma that happened for many, many years, had tentacles in every direction that everyone played a role in, whether they liked it or not, for good or for bad. And George Seifert, when he left the 49ers in 1987, he's head out the building, and we saw each other and thanked each other for all the years. And he turned to me and said, Steve, I always felt like you did better when I tortured you. And I almost fainted from the pain of all of. I never really put that together, but then when he said, I'm like, oh my gosh, you actually believed that I played better. Oh, the pain of that, because I just, so the fulfillment of me screaming at him was looking back at that statement now, because now you have to go backwards 4 or 5 years to that moment when I was yelling at him, is that I had it with, at the point, what I realized now was torture. and I wasn't going to take it anymore. And we were going to fight in a public forum on national TV. We were fighting. I'd never wanted to fight someone in my life, really want to punch and fight. He and I were going to fight, and I was trying to say things that would make him turn around and fight me. It was a really strange space for me. I've never been in that since. I'm grateful for George that he never turned around. He didn't take the bait. After the game, I was still livid and screaming at people like he better come see me in the locker room. Better not. And what did George do? He never even came in the locker room. He just went home. He just sit there because he knew better, right? It's like, I'm not going to mess with that. But yeah, yeah.
Do you think, let's look at the modern game today. It seems like players have a little bit more power and leverage than they did in your era and do more things like give the coach tough feedback. Any thoughts about that, whether that's productive, counterproductive?
Well, that began, Eddie DeBartolo, our owner of the 49ers, starting in 1980, and Eddie DeBartolo is in the Hall of Fame today for one particular reason, and that is he was the first owner in any sport that saw the players as partners. They were never partners, ever. No one even thought of them as partners. At best, they thought that we were chattel. I mean, like, it just never felt like we were in it together. That's where that started. That's where the relationships began that were fruitful. And Bill Walsh absolutely fostered that. And then other owners who saw that at first hated it. And then over time, the really enlightened ones started to see that was actually the future. The Bob Krafts and the New England Patriots, Mr. Bolin in Denver. Like, they saw it and they actually said, you know what, that resonates with me. And it started to become more normalized, the relationship. And what you're seeing today is a full measure of a relationship. Why can't players advocate for themselves in a situation where equity value is being driven to owners only? Players don't enjoy any equity value growth. And so they have to fight for some, as a paid employee, they have to figure out a way to get their share of what's being made. And so I think there's always, and Stan, you would understand, everyone has an opinion about how you articulate that. Do you do it in public? Do you do it in private? How do you say it? What are the words? What are the actions? What is the spirit of what you're doing? That all still very much matters. But what's now you're seeing more and more is the ability for players to say, hey, wait a second. We have a relationship. It's been well fostered now. There's an arena for this. And now I'm entering that arena, and we're going to have a relationship, and we're going to come to a negotiated settlement of it. You see Brandon Ayuk, maybe he decided this in the last 5 minutes, but he's in a negotiation right now that's heated, I'm sure, receiver for the 49ers here locally. And that's that spirit of he's tweeting about it. He's on Instagram about it. He's in the space, and we can say, oh, that shouldn't happen. No, I think it should happen. Players should be able to be in the arena and be free to have that relationship. And I'm grateful for Eddie DeBartolo to start that.
Interesting. I didn't know that history. Last football question. In negotiation, it's really important to understand the other side, what motivates them, sometimes even helping them figure out what motivates them. I remember you telling me a story. I can't remember if the player was Darren Woodson or someone else on the Cowboys, where you got to know him so well that it helped you figure out how to play against him. Do you remember that story?
Yeah. So the better I got, the more at peace I was on the field, and the more at peace I got, the more present. And when you're present, when you're fully present, and we should work at this in every moment of our lives, but when you're fully present, everything about the situation is open to you. The sounds, the behavior, the thoughts, the movements, the smells, the spirit of the moment, like it all, and I think that the better quarterbacks get to a place where they're more and more present. And the more present I became, the more aware I became of everyone else. And as I became more aware of everyone else, you recognize that defenses, especially even in the NFL, as sophisticated as they are really, because the game is so fast, are built off of rote memory and rote repetitive motion. And so once you see the motions that defenses are going through, there's huge tells for what's going to come. And I noticed that with Darren Woodson, he was a safety for the Cowboys and one of the best defenses and the best teams of all time. And I remember I got to the point where I could look at him, and if he engaged me in any way when I looked at him, then I knew that he was not going to blitz. But when he would look away and try to avoid my eyes, I knew that he was going to blitz, because he's trying to say, he's like, he felt guilty. He's like, oh, don't look at me. I'm not here. I'm not here. And it was fun stuff like that really started to help my game. And it was fun also to just recognize that human behavior is very patterned, and you can especially in intimate relationships you have in family and marriages, like getting to understand the intimate kind of patterns, and the behaviors and the language is super useful to be present so you can be a better, husband or father or son or whatever else it is, because it's, until you do it, until you become present, you end up missing
Yeah.
so much of the negotiation. I mean, when you talk about negotiations, engage in the full negotiation. Don't negotiate off of a piecemeal negotiation, which most people do most of their lives.
That's true. Curious if you ever told Darren, post-retirement, hey, I knew when you were blitzing and you weren't.
Yeah, we talked way about it. Yeah, sure. Of course.
Well,
He's
you
the guy that
got to
made it
the
for me.
you got to the Super Bowl. I remember the term you used was, "Hey, it's a monkey off my back. You won the Super Bowl. You're the MVP." What did you do after the Super Bowl to celebrate, and how long did that high last of being the Super Bowl champ and the MVP?
Well, Super Bowl for the 49ers, because of Joe Montana going to 4 and winning them all, became the Maginot Line and became the watermark that had to be hit. Otherwise, it really wasn't that valuable. And so you could make this statement, wait a second, we won 18 football games to get here. We were NFC champions. We were division champions. We played the best football we've seen in 50 years. But unless you won the Super Bowl, it just didn't matter. And you can complain against it. You could say, oh, that's not fair. You guys should look at other criteria for excellence. Perception, if the perception is that Super Bowl is the only thing that matters, then make it the reality, because it is really the only thing that matters. So for me, winning the Super Bowl became life-changing, because forevermore, I'd hit the high water mark. And once you hit it, there was a different way that everyone saw you. And for me, that's absolutely true. And it's not fair. It's not right, but it is true. And so I think that's why I say we get back to the truest truths, being vulnerable enough to see how people see it, what is their truth, how do they take it in. It doesn't matter how it matters how you take it in, but it doesn't matter to the negotiations nearly as much as how someone else takes it in. And
Yep.
once getting to that resonance between you and the other person and how they really see it is vital, because so much negotiation is wasted daily in the misalignment of fundamentals. And so it's like, why can't we get along? Well, because we freaking don't even agree on whether the sky is blue or green. And so
Yep.
until you start to, kind of at least engage in that, it doesn't matter.
I remember getting a call probably week after that from you, and you said to me, and again, these may be stories you don't remember, but you said, you're not going to believe what happened. And I said, what happened, Steve? And he said, well, I went down to Disneyland to
Oh, yeah.
celebrate the football. And then you told me a story. Do you remember what I'm talking
Yeah,
about?
so
What
at the
happened?
end, they had a parade down Main Street at Disneyland, which was talk about a high watermark. There's a high watermark of winning the Super Bowl. There's a high watermark of being at Disneyland, being the focus of the parade with you and Mickey Mouse up on the float going down Main Street the day after the Super Bowl. Like I remember losing my mind, like screaming, people are like, "You're the man, Steve, you're the greatest." And I remember yelling back, "I am the greatest, I am the man." Like it was the best. But as usual, it never lasts very long. And the band stopped playing. We turned backstage, and there's two little kids sitting on the curb waiting for, this thing to be done so they could go back and do all the rides. Probably 6 and 8 years old. And so it got quiet. We were turning backstage, and the little boy stood up and started to come to because he saw Mickey Mouse. And he's like, "Mickey Mouse! Oh my gosh, Mickey Mouse!" And his brother grabbed him and said, "You can't get near him. The big guy won't let you." And the side of the float was Steve Young, Super Bowl MVP and gold and red streamers, the 49ers. And I remember thinking to myself, of all the times in life, I'm not Mickey Mouse's bodyguard. It's right now. This is my time. This is my moment. This is check the sign, kid. And I remember I might have yelled. I remember, but there was that moment where you're like, I don't want this moment to end. I want the high water mark to stay high water, and I don't want it ever to end. And here it was 4 minutes later, and the kid's already calling me a bodyguard for Mickey Mouse. And I was like, isn't that true for life? Like, as high as you get. And think about the actual going to Everest. Like people always use Everest as a metaphor. You actually get to the top of Everest. You got about 4 minutes. You take a picture, you plant a flag, and you head back down. And that's it. So anyone who has great desires for some ultimate moment in their life, I say yes. I say worth it. I say go for it. But recognize it's 4 minutes long, and then you got to come back down.
You and I have talked a lot over the years about negotiating celebrity. You are still a celebrity. And I've always been interested in how the public interacts with you. Have you ever met any celebrities where you got a little bit hijacked and it felt like,
Well, Stan, and you probably had this happen to you as well. Whenever you meet anyone of any fame, the next thing out of your mouth is going to be embarrassing and ridiculous and stupid and not thoughtful and awkward. I've done it. I met Charlton Heston once, who was this is 30 years ago when he was the king, one of the oldest, greatest actors of all time. And I said, I loved you in Big Hur. And it was Ben-Hur. And, and he's like, oh, thanks, and I've had so many people meet me and immediately say the weirdest stuff. Like, most of the times it's like, well, I'm a Packer fan, I don't like you, or, just weird, stupid, crazy things that people say when they meet fame. Fame has a way. If you're negotiating against someone who's famous, take some deep breaths, because fame, first of all, fame is a thief for the person who's famous, because it steals accountability in people's lives. Then people are not as nearly as accountable when they're famous. But fame on the other side can feel like a huge weapon against you that not everyone means to use against you, but it sure feels like a heavy weapon that fame is. And that actually makes you feel awkward, and that's why you say crazy, stupid stuff.
Do you remember the time that a woman confronted you in the airport?
Oh yeah, I remember that. She goes, that's what she said. She goes, hey, Steve Young. I looked over and goes, I hate you. And I'm like, so glad to say hello, And she's like, oh, but I don't really, because that was her feeling, was she was a Raider fan and she hated me. And so it's like, that's what I'm telling you. When people meet you abruptly and they recognize you, it's funny what they say.
Yeah. I'm remembering one story. You called me and said, hey, we got backstage tickets tonight to see Bon Jovi. Do you want to come?
Oh, do you want to? Come on.
I got to tell this story because it's so funny. I said, I don't want to go, Steve. He said, no, I don't want to be alone. Come with me. We were both single guys in the Bay Area. And so we go and we enter backstage to meet those guys. You remember what happened?
Yeah, we were in the lot. There's like it was SAP Arena where the hockey team plays. There's a locker room. So a lot of times when I have a concert, the locker room becomes kind of like the green room for the performers. So we're in there, and in walks Richie Sambora, which is the famous guitarist for John Bon Jovi. And I just didn't. I hadn't really paid enough attention to really. I don't know what to say, but I was like, John, how you doing, man? I stood up. He's like, oh no, I'm Richie. I'm like, oh frick, I can't. There's two world famous musicians, Richie Sambora and John Bon Jovi, and I can't even get it straight. And that was a humiliating moment. I appreciate you bringing that one
up. Let's close with some thoughts about current dynamics in football. I'm going to give you a couple hypotheticals. Roger Goodell calls you and says, Steve, I want to meet. And he locks you in the room and he says, what 3 things should I do to change the NFL right now? What are the changes that need to be made? And you've got the job of negotiating that. You've got to persuade him of those 3 things. So what are the 3 things and how do you approach him about that?
Wow. First one that pops in my mind really has nothing to do with the players, which is unusual, but it is about generational ownership and equity value, because so many, the NFL is as big, 80 of the top 100 TV shows rated in the country of all TV, 80 of the top 100 last year were NFL football games. The NFL is the most dominant media business in the world by far. Second only to the Olympics, probably as you see the results, but the Olympics come for 2 weeks every 4 years. So it doesn't matter as much as, the NFL. So when I said the NFL, what I'd say to Roger is, you have this generational owners, and because people feel like they're owners, like the woman who said, I hate you because she's a Raider fan. They feel like they're owners of the team. So it's kind of the sense that that NFL franchises are semi-private. They're not privately owned, but yet the reality is they are privately owned. And I think generationally, this works against the NFL getting to be better and better, is to have the same ownership group through now fourth generation. And I think figuring out ways to they're starting to allow private equity to take stakes in NFL teams. I think that's smart because private equity will force some rigor, financial rigor, and performance and different ways in operations that I think will be very good. So I think I would encourage them to figure out ways to transition ownership through time. I think that'd be number one. Number two, I would say, to that point, I would say I want the owners to be more vocal and more out front, since they own the equity value in the team, to not allow everything to be the general manager and the players who take the heat when things are losses. I think every loss, the owner should speak first. Like, I own the team. I'm ultimately responsible. We lost the game. It's my fault. Like, I feel like the truest truth is not the quarterback, it's actually the owner. As far as the game itself, I mean, they've done such a nice job. I would say that they're so powerful, and it's so hard not to be a bully out into the marketplace. I would encourage them to really, like, they do so much good with all of their aspects of with armed services, with breast cancer, with racial equality, with there's just a lot of good that the NFL does, and they lead the way in so many ways. I would just say that there's even so much more that they could do, and they're so powerful, and that how they interact with in a business level, at a media level. I think there's to lean into that relationship and be more abundant with it all. They could just it's amazing what they do. I think they could do way more.
Excellent. Let's focus on, again, at the player level, persuasion and influence. And let's just pick some of the notable quarterbacks. We've talked a lot about your career, but let's looking at, say, Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Patrick Mahomes. What are those guys? They're obviously, Hall of Fame quarterbacks. What do each of them do that impresses you in terms of persuasion, influence, and negotiating leadership on their teams?
So Tom Brady is fascinating to me. A couple of things that make him incredibly fascinating. One is that he is not very fast, as far as running. Like, he's not somebody that's going to run away from you. He didn't run very much as a player. He did all of that amazing work over 22 years, I want to say, which is, the whole thing's incredible, from one place essentially, with no real ability to do plan B. He had plan A or nothing, where I always had plan A and then plan B, because I could go run around and do some stuff and figure it out. And I'm overstating it a little bit, but I just tip my cap to the great Tom Brady, that he could decipher through the interaction of 22 humans in a way that always got that ball out and efficiently kind of on its way with not a lot of optionality. And I admire that. I think that I would not want to have played that way. I don't know how I would have done. And I just think that I tip my cap to him. The second thing that makes him incredibly interesting to me is that playing great football in the NFL is probably, it takes everything about you. You have to pour yourself into it to be even good, if not great. And so knowing that, what you never want to do is make your life more complicated in any way. Engage with the media in the wrong way, or in the street, or have your life be more complicated. Like, don't do anything that makes your life more complicated, because you got to go do this most impossible job that only 2 or 3 humans at a time are doing, this elite quarterbacking. Yet he married Giselle. And for 15 or 20 years, when they're married, he's complicated, in my mind, complicated his life in a way that I can't even describe. Yet his game got better. His game got more efficient. And I just think that has to be one of the greatest feats, and that's nothing to do with Giselle as a person or her being a supermodel, or that's not the point. The point is her fame. She was world famous. The complexity of the fame and the complexity of another person's life that you're taking in, and then now going to play a very complex, difficult sport job and getting better at it is something that I just can't put my head around. And I don't know that any other human could do it. I think Tom was uniquely qualified to go do that. So that's Tom. I just think there's a couple things that are just phenomenal to me. Patrick Mahomes, when I first saw him play, he'd started one game before, and I was at a Monday night game in Denver, and I was standing on the sidelines watching him play. And he broke out and ran towards me, scrambling, and actually threw the ball lefty. He was under duress. They were trying to tackle him, and he changed and put his ball in his hand lefty and threw it for a completion. And then stood up and he saw me and he goes, "Hey, Steve." And I'm like, I had never seen, and I've been around a lot of football players and a lot of intimately, it's not from I'm watching from the stands. I'm watching from either the sidelines as a player or as a commentator for Monday Night Football. I'm right there. So I know what's happening. I know the intimations and I know everything about it. I have never been around a player who was more present on the field, who, with all of that's happening and all the chaos and all the adrenaline and all the pressure and all the noise and the fans and the media, everything that's about NFL football, to be so completely present as if he was sitting in my backyard on a like a rope swing or a tire, or in a hammock, and we were just shooting the breeze. That's what it felt like.
When he said, "Hey, Steve."
Yeah, that's amazing to me. That he would be, and he just under duress threw the ball left-handed. And then so the presence as a young player, you want to know why he's great? Because he's so present. And gets a gift. He grew up with a dad that played Major League Baseball. I know that had to be a part of it, but most of us had to grow into that kind of presence. And he had it as a young kid, and it's such a gift.
Amazing. And then the third one I asked you about is Peyton Manning.
Well, Peyton, he's he is the ultimate CEO. Quarterbacking is CEO in some ways, but I'm talking about CEO of all things. He finished the game and he had planned out every aspect of it. He had businesses, ideas that he launched. He was very strategic around everything that he's ever done. Every communication was strategic. His relationships were strategic in their benefit. Strategic doesn't necessarily mean it's to his benefit. Strategic means that I'm into it for a purpose, right? I'm in the relationship for a particular purpose, and I'm going to strategically get to that place. And so there's nothing was ad hoc with Peyton Manning. Everything was just specifically planned, orchestrated, and I think that's just an amazing quality. The discipline and the foreknowledge and the foresight. There's just very few people that are like that. And I tip my cap to him because his career was, unbelievable, and how he did it. He did it in a way that was very much more scientific than art. He is the ultimate scientist in that way, and he thrived. Where I always believed you had to be an artist to be incredibly great. And he, he's one of those guys that proved me wrong. Not completely. I'm 99% right, but there's always that guy that proves you wrong.
Well, a thing that comes to mind as you say that is you played in a different time. I think art was easier. It was easier to be a quarterback artist in the years that you played than it would be today. Is that fair?
Yeah, I actually feel a little bit differently about that, Stan. In a way, the game, because of rule changes that have really hurt the defense, it slowed defenses down, so there's more space. And so because there's more space, there's more athleticism. And in that way, the game has come to me. And the game today is much more familiar to me. But to your point, I think that science, being really strategic and focused and scientific about things, was very much about before, in the last 10 years. So I kind of include Peyton in, even though we're 10 years apart, I see us as the same generation of football, where today's game is so different from me and Peyton because of the rule changes.
Yeah. Well, Steve, this has been great. You've managed to surpass my high expectations. I've interviewed a number.
Man, come on, don't butter me up. That's not like you.
No, I've interviewed you a bunch of times over the years, and you've managed to weave in your professional life, particularly football, into negotiation in a super useful way. And I think listeners are going to learn a lot and really enjoy this. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Great friend. Thanks, Stan.
All right. Thanks for listening to All Things Negotiation. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. If you enjoyed the show, please consider giving us a rating and leaving a review, which helps others find the show. The show was produced by Benny Beausoleil. Original music by Peter Breinhold. Designed by Aubrey Benson. Thanks for listening.